as I was looking at the NBA's locked on top 100 players list, and we saw Jaren Jackson Jr., we saw Ja Morant on there, and those were the only two Grizzlies players on there. But for next season, when we do this list again next year, there is one Grizzlies player who I feel should certainly be on that list with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. Let's talk about who that is and more coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. And if you're looking at the calendar, you know what day of the week it is. Shout out to my co-host, Joe Monax, who isn't here with us today, but it's Friday, and we got to get down on Friday. So let's get down on Friday. And shout out to the Green Bay Packers as well. But people don't like when I talk about the Green Bay Packers, so I won't say too much there. But my co-host Joe Monax is a Commanders fan. I won't get to say too much to him on the show today, so I just got to give a shout out to my squad because we look like Super Bowl contenders. But that's neither here nor there. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code Locked On NBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Again, we want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every single day. Make sure you continue to do that as well. Make sure you continue to like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those good things. Locked On Grizzlies. As we get into the stretch run here, we're finally getting closer. We're roughly a couple weeks now from preseason camp. I'll be there in attendance, giving you guys all the updates, everything that we need to know about player, injury updates, how guys are progressing through camp. Tomas Isolo's first camp as the Grizzlies head coach. There will be a lot of storylines in camp, so make sure you stay tuned for that as well. But in today's episode, as I mentioned in the opening, we spent a lot of time this week talking about the Locked On NBA's top 100 player list, right? And on the Grizzlies side, they had two players in the top 30. Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant were both listed in the top 30 of that list. If you missed it, we're going to pull up the list here right now. Jaren Jackson Jr. ranked number 25. Ja Morant ranked number 28. My co-host Joe Mullinax wasn't a huge fan of these rankings. Me, myself, I personally wasn't either. But this is where they rank. This is where our colleagues in totality ranked Ja Morant 28th. Jaren Jackson Jr. 25th on their list. But after those two players, there were no more Grizzlies players on the list. And then Joe Monax touched on it a little bit in a recent episode. But outside of those guys, there actually was, I guess you could say it's the best of the rest list, where roughly 50 or so players who just missed the top 100 were listed. And the Grizzlies had 5 players. The Grizzlies had 5 players listed on the list of players who were pretty much right outside the top 100. Joe Monax talked about Santi Aldama being one of the top guys. I believe he was the 10th or 11th guy ranked outside of the top 100. So he has a strong case for potentially being in that top 100. But you had Santi Aldama, on that list. Then you had some other young bucks, right? You had Jalen Wells. You had Contavious Caldwell-Pope. Ty Jerome, I believe, after Santi Aldama was the next player. It was Santi, Ty Jerome, and then it was Jalen Wells. Contavious Caldwell-Pope was on there as well. Zach Edey was on there as well. So those are the 5 players. When we talk about the trajectory of this team, those are the 5 players it really comes down to for me. I mean, the list pretty much makes it make sense because once you figure out with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., they're going to get a heavier load. I fully believe that Ja's going to have a really big season. It's hard to convince me otherwise with the way this team's going to play, with the way that the lineup is constructed, that Ja Morant won't have a huge season. Jaren Jackson Jr. should be pretty good as well, but those players around them, who is going to take that leap? Who's going to be solid enough? And in this case, as we're talking about, who could be that next guy when we look at this list next season? Say, the Grizzlies have 3, or maybe the Grizzlies have 4 players listed in their top 100. And it's easy to me. This was an easy decision for me in terms of who will be that next guy who could be that top 100 player. I think there's 2 guys specifically that really come to mind for me. I want to know what you guys think as well. But the guy who I think when we look at the list next season and say, oh, yeah, he cracked the top 100. For me, it's Zach Edey. Zach Edey should be a top 100 NBA player this upcoming season if everything goes well. You say to Mike, what makes you say that? Well, number one, opportunity. Because this is a league of opportunity. A lot of the professional leagues are leagues of opportunity, but the opportunity for Zach Edey isn't just, oh, he's a former first round pick. The Grizzlies want to look like they made the right decision or whatever the case may be. It's not just that simple. It's the fact that Isolo's system, heavy screen setting, pick and roll, Zach Edey's going to get his touches. It's going to be designed for this guy to be a double-double machine. And we saw signs of that in that small sample size at the end of the season. Zach Edey was putting up some big numbers. The offensive numbers weren't all the way there, but on the defensive end, you're talking about 13, 14 rebounds. And I it's no doubt in my mind. Year two, stronger player. Yeah, the injury probably slowed the progression a little bit, him getting the ankle surgery, whatever the case may be. But you got to remember, this is an ankle surgery where he and the Grizzlies pretty much said, this is best case scenario for you. So let's go ahead and get this out the way. Let's get this ankle problem out the way, because when you're back, they want him to be back. They want him to be on the floor. They want him to be available. They want him to be the enforcer. With his ability to set screens, perfect for this system. When you talk about Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., having that 7'3" physical, specimen, so to speak, kind of being, I feel like, the third offensive option, because Jalen Wells, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, really solid players, but they're going to be your spacers. They're going to be the guys who kind of your connectors on the offensive end. Zach Edey's going to be the next guy outside of Jaren, outside of Ja, that you're going to want to take advantage of mismatches, because that's going to be the name of the game for Jaren and Ja, because they're stars, and that's what stars do. Stars find weaknesses. They say, hey, let's go at that weaknesses, and they exploit them. Outside of those two, the next guy in the starting lineup where I say he's got to exploit the mismatches on the offensive end is Zach Edey. So I see a scoring uptick. Doesn't have to be huge. I'm not talking 15 points a game or anything like that. Maybe 12, 13. You get that from Zach Edey. You get 11 rebounds. You get solid defense. It's a top 100 player to me. That is for sure the makings of a top 100 player in the NBA. And just for reference here, like let's look at the last 10 players to crack the top 100 list. You're talking about Christian Braun, Jalen Green, Jakob Poeltl, Nikola Vucevic, RJ Barrett, Peyton Pritchard. Nikhil Alexander Walker was at 97, CJ McCollum at 98, Anthony Simons at 99, Toumani Camara at 100. So this is kind of the list, right? And these are solid players. Christian Braun, solid winning player. Jalen Green, he had some pop to his game. But why can't Zach Edey have a Jakob Poeltl type season, or Vucevic with the Chicago Bulls? Why can't he have those type of seasons? And to kind of run it in a little bit more, why can't he do what Ivica Zubac did in his career? Zubac's in the top 50 now, but take those steps, basically becoming a stronger player and developing into this double-double specimen. Why can't he do what Jonas Valanciunas did earlier in his career? Good game here, good game there, got stronger, got more physical, and it was lights out for the league. Zach Edey is already a strong guy, and we saw a lot of that, but we also saw him get pushed around a little bit, especially against some of those bigger players, especially against the likes of a Zubac or against a Valanciunas and Jokic and those type of bigs. He got pushed around a little bit. Do you really think Zach Edey's gonna make a living about getting pushed around in the NBA? Not gonna happen, because he's strong too. He's gonna get stronger. And when we talk to him at the exit interviews, right, this was a big point of emphasis for him. Being stronger, being able to be that player who's going to be that enforcer for the Grizzlies. I think Zach Edey is in line for a breakout year. The injury, I don't think it'll keep him out too long. I think we could still be talking about him having a big season, not just because he's a player who's going to make the improvements internally, but because he's in a situation where I feel like in the starting lineup, he's going to be the third guy that they look at on the offensive end. The rebounding is already elite. I always talk about what elite skill do you have if you're a role player. If you're considered a role player in the NBA, Do you have an elite skill? Many of them have pretty good, above average skills, or whatever the case may be. Zach Edey has an elite skill. He should be one of the top rebounders in the NBA, without a doubt. Zach Edey should definitely do that. A couple other guys that we could talk about briefly. I think Ty Jerome will make a case. He could make a case for a top 100 player this season. Similar situation for Zach Edey. Like, he's not going to start, so the numbers might not be too eye popping or whatever the case may be. But Ty Jerome's 3-point shooting, as we talked about, in the last episode, there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. There's going to be opportunity for him to be, a self-creator. The Grizzlies are going to need him. Sometimes he's going to have to close games, and then we know the injury bug bites sometimes. And Ja Morant hasn't played 65 to 70 games in recent years. And if that's the case again, you got to feel like, with the likes of Scottie Pippen Jr. and Ty Jerome, especially Ty Jerome, with his offensive, ability, he's going to be a guy. In that case, if you need someone to step in or play alongside of Ja, Ty Jerome is a guy you could expect to fill that role with his shooting, with his scoring ability, and his playmaking. A couple other guys that I'm not really as high on cracking into the top 100. I know some people are going to say, man, Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells is a very solid player, but I said this in Summer League, and I'll say it again. I'm not going to put Jalen Wells in that top 100 conversation just yet until we see that self-creation and that playmaking leap. Did not see enough of that in Summer League. But Summer League was not the setting, I think, for Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells is going to be the player who really benefits from playing off of Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. And those guys are really going to benefit from having Jalen Wells to play off of, having him as a floor spacing threat and things like that. But when you look at top 100 players, we just showed some of those names. Even if you go to the guys who kind of, played the role where they didn't, a lot of spot up shooting and things like that, like a Christian Braun, for example. But the thing with Braun is he was one of the top transition scorers in the NBA. He got out and ran the floor. Jokic found him on outlets, and he was very good at that. How can a guy like Jalen Wells separate himself on the offensive end outside of just doing the 3-and-D work? We know. Well, I feel like his mid-range jumper is really good. How can he get to it? Is that something where it's just a one dribble pull-up? Is it something that he can maneuver off of a screen, get to his spots, and kind of make a living out of it? That's kind of going to be the next step for him. I need to see more in those areas before I say Jalen Wells is a top 100 player. I think KCP is who he is. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He's going to be a very solid 3-and-D guy for this Grizzlies team. We'll talk more about him and Jalen Wells a little bit later in the show. And the same thing with Santi Aldama. Like, Santi very well could take that leap into top 100 player. And you could have made an argument he would have been a top 100 player this past season. But with Jaren Jackson Jr. potentially, possibly missing some time, like him getting off to a good start, Santi, that is, it's very possible. But again, this is a guy who I want to see be stronger. I want to see be more assertive. We know what the shooting potential is. We know what the playmaking potential is, but the all-around game of Santi Aldama will determine if he's able to crack the top 100. Let me know what you guys think. You probably have different perspective. You may think Jalen Wells or Santi. You may even say Cedric Howard will be a top 100 player this upcoming season, but that's my list. I think with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey is the guy who I think should be jumping into the top 100 with them. But coming up here next on Locked On Grizzlies, we got to switch the tone of the conversation and talk about the perimeter defense. We're going to talk about that here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Listen up, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or even investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's where there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It's for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Make sure you go take advantage of this opportunity. It's a great opportunity out there. Shout out to the organizers out there. Monarch Money keeps you organized. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code locked on NBA. Make sure you go take advantage of that now over at monarchmoney.com. The Memphis Grizzlies have a chance to take advantage of what should be a much improved perimeter defense. That's how I feel. That's how they feel. And that's how many of you feel. If you go back to last season, right? Go back to last season. We saw the Grizzlies defense, particularly in the second half, but there were some signs there, in the first half of the season. But we saw the perimeter defense fall off a cliff. And not just fall off a cliff, but it poured into other sectors. It poured into other areas of the defense. And the Grizzlies just weren't the defensive team we've seen for years under Taylor Jenkins, that we saw during the grit and grind era. All of it. This was completely out of the sorts for what we're used to seeing from the Grizzlies. And it all started with the perimeter defense. They could not keep the ball in front of them. Grizzlies players could not keep the ball in front of them. And again, as I said, the signs were there. The signs were there early in the season. I mean, anytime you're throwing a rookie out there and say, hey, we're dependent on you, it's kind of questionable. And Jalen Wells, he stepped up to the plate. He stepped up to the plate. He held it down, and he did what he had to do. But now it's worth having a conversation on who are the top three Grizzlies perimeter defenders. And I say top three because I think that's kind of the number that you really need. You really need three stout perimeter defenders, especially in the case of the Grizzlies, because you got Ja Morant. Ja Morant's going to be on the floor. Ja Morant is not someone I would consider a great perimeter defender, but Ja Morant showed last season he's willing. He a dog. He not just going to let a man get in front of him and score on him with ease. I think Ja had a really solid defensive season this past season, particularly, his ability to stay in front of those quicker guards. It's tough because you need Ja Morant and his energy, for much of what he does on the offensive end. But there were times last season, I think it was Donovan Mitchell is the example that comes to mind. His quickness, Darius Garland, those guys, their quickness really stood out, against the Grizzlies. And Ja Morant said, I got it. And it'd be for a couple positions or something, but you saw the defensive lateral agility and things like that he brings to the table. But the problem with Ja is he's smaller. And when you play, those teams with those bigger, jumbo wings and things like that, it comes into play. Even when he, is in great position and things like that, there's just certain limitations that are always going to be there in terms of Ja Morant. But let's get into this top three perimeter defenders. Listen, for me, number one, I got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And some people may disagree with that. But I'll say it like this. If you look into the numbers, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was very solid defensively last season, his year in Orlando. Very, very solid defensive season. But I want to go back a couple years ago real quick, because for some reason, and we're going to find out really soon. It's just I got to keep pointing this out. But for some reason, last season almost feels like an outlier for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It just was a lot of, especially with the shooting. But you wonder how that translated to, the defensive end and things like that. But when you talk to people in Orlando, he was solid defensively. They never thought of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as some defensive weakness, especially considering, Jalen Suggs missing a lot of time, which forced Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in his defensive role. He became even more important than he already was. But I want to go back a couple seasons ago really quick, because quite frankly, he barely missed being a all defensive all NBA player. He should have made an all defensive team, according to a lot of people who are, out there in Denver. When I talk to people about the year that he had, here's some of the numbers that come up. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope ranked number one 2 seasons ago with when opponents shot a minimum of 200 shots against players who guarded guys who shot a minimum of at least 200 shots. This is according to Second Spectrum tracking data. He held players to a league low 40.6% when he was the nearest defender. This is just a couple years ago. Guy shot 40.6% from the field against Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. This was in Denver. This is a big reason why he got the big bucks with Orlando. And it's not just that, because he did it on the perimeter. He did it when players were heavily, he forced a lot of heavily contested shots. And when you watch him move in Orlando, because a lot of the defense stuff is eye test to me, right? He moves the same way. The guy we saw in Denver, Orlando, I think there wasn't much different in terms of his ability to move, his ability to navigate through the screens, his willingness to be, a stout defender. And he's number one on this list for me right now. I think when it comes down to it, our number two guy that we're going to talk about, there is one potential area of weakness there, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope should be a little bit better in that area. And that area that I'm talking about is guarding those bigger defenders. And without further ado, our number two guy is Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells should be an even better defender this season. I love, we want to talk about Summer League. I love the aggression that he showed on the defensive end in Summer League, because we saw a player that was trying to be more of a defensive playmaker. We know how sound Jalen Wells can be on the defensive end. He's going to stay in front of his man. He's going to use his size. But in Summer League, we saw a guy picking up half court, making guys pick up their dribble, forcing turnovers, reaching in there, trying to get some steals and things like that. I'm like, if Jalen Wells becomes that, type of guy where we're talking averaging over a steal a game, getting some deflections, now you're in another tier of elite defending, because you got your guys who are just great on ball. I'm not letting you score, and that's my job. And then you got those guys who can limit the players in front of them. But then when the players in front of them say, "Hey, I don't want the ball. Somebody else gotta score while this guy's all over me," he can still be an impactful defender, because now you're playing the passing lanes and things like that. Jalen Wells showed some of that in Summer League. This is going to be the next step for him. But again, 6'7". We already talked about the fact that he's put on some weight. I can't wait to see what that looks like against the Kawhis, against the LeBron, against the Lukas of the world, because that's what he did it for. Jalen Wells fared really good against the Damian Lillards, right? The Tyrese Maxeys and things like that. But where some of his struggles came was when he had to go against LeBron. Or you remember that game early in the season when Luka was still with Dallas, and there were some struggles there. Number three on this list, to me, is pretty easy too. I'm going to go Scottie Pippen Jr. Scottie Pippen Jr. is a dog. He has the defensive playmaking that we just talked about with Jalen Wells. He is going to force steals. I love his aggression when he picks up, full court. He is a menace. He's going to foul a little bit, but it's funny because he's going to foul a little bit, but who cares? He's coming off the bench. His job is to come in, set the tone defensively, and he does just that. The only thing with Scottie Pippen Jr. is he is, like Ja, somewhat on the smaller side, and that's okay when he's guarding those smaller guys, but there have been so many games where we've seen him guard, Kevin Durant. We've seen, him have to guard some of those bigger players in the NBA, and when Scottie Pippen Jr. is put in those positions, there are certain limitations. There are limitations that come with that, but at the end of the day, he's up for the task. Those are the top three Grizzlies defenders for me. A notable missing name that I want to touch on before we move on to our next segment is the missing name of Vince Williams Jr. I think if all goes well, if we see that fully healthy Vince Williams Jr., we see the Vince Williams Jr. that I've been hearing about. So I've talked about it a little bit on the show. We see that Vince Williams Jr., he'll be in the top three. He'll be in the top three without a doubt. He has the size. He has the arms. He has the willingness, right? He talks a lot about doing the dirty work for Ja, for Jaren. And that's the mentality that you have. When I think Vince Williams Jr., I think real Black Air Force One energy. If you don't know what Black Air Force One energy is, go look it up in the Urban Dictionary real quick. But he gives me very much that Black Air Force One energy. He's that dog that Joe Monex likes to talk about. So this is going to be a big year for Vince Williams Jr. We talked a lot about that. It's a year where he has a club option after this season. The Grizzlies are going to say, we want you or we don't. He has to prove to the Grizzlies why they should want him. And I think that all starts with what he does on the defensive end. you know what? Jaren Jackson Jr., everything that he does starts on the defensive end, but in the offseason, a lot of what he does starts with what he does in the community. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked on Grizzlies. But before we get to that, you remember that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Look, why do I love FanDuel? Because I told y'all, money line. I told you earlier this week, Packers money line. So you know what I did? I took my Packers money line. I took my Packers spread. Forget the money line. I took the spread, and they won 27-18, easily covering the spread in that game. And guess what? I'm getting paid because of it. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Make sure you go take advantage of that now over at FanDuel. Welcome back to Locked on Grizzlies here, and we're going to close out today's show by talking more about Jaren Jackson Jr. We talked a little bit about him earlier in the show when we talk about these players that can take the leaps around Jaren Jackson Jr. But you know what else the players can kind of follow Jaren's lead in, and that's the way that he kind of, has kind of embedded himself in the Memphis community since he's been here. Jaren Jackson Jr. has, done a lot of things in the community. He's always been, I think, one of the more active players on the Grizzlies and probably in the league too. And you can make a case in the league what he does and whether it's his voice for social justice and things like that, or what he does with women in sports, right? Those are some of the things that you see Jaren Jackson Jr. really advocating for this so far in his career. But Jaren Jackson Jr. is hosting the basketball camp this upcoming weekend. So if you got some kids, you got some boys specifically for this camp. I've heard it's going to be a girl camp too, but this one will be boys 6 to 16 on Saturday. Memphis Sports and Event Center. It's listed online. Make sure you go check that out. Jaren Jackson Jr. Basketball camp. The prices vary based on the different packages. From what I've seen, there are packages where you could take a picture. Kids get a picture with Jaren Jackson Jr. There's bigger packages where you can get an autograph. You can get a picture with Jaren Jackson Jr. And even the parents as well could get a picture with Jaren Jackson Jr. So you got some bigger packages as well that give you those options. So we'll go check all that out. It's a big week for Jaren Jackson Jr. This is his third annual camp. I believe he did this last year at the Memphis Sports and Events Center as well. This was actually originally planned. I believe the original date was July 23rd. Then we know Jaren Jackson Jr. got hurt. All these things happened. But Jaren Jackson Jr. basketball camp coming up. Make sure you guys get out there in the Memphis community. Bring the boys out there. Bring the boys ages 6 through 16. Good opportunity for them to kind of see that NBA All-Star, two-time NBA All-Star Jaren Jackson Jr. And I'll also be there as well. So if you see me say, hey, Damichael, hey, what's up? Shout out Locked on Grizzlies, shout out Commercial Appeal, however you want to do it. You just want to say, Damichael, I don't, some people come up to me and say, Damichael, I got a bone to pick with you. And that's okay. I'm cool with a good, we can debate. It's fine. You got a bone to pick with me about something I said. We can talk about that too. But I'll be at Jaren Jackson Jr.'s camp as well. As guess what? So since I'll be there, that means the media will be there. We'll have a chance to talk to Jaren Jackson Jr. during and after his camp. And we'll have the updates of what that conversation looks like on the next episode of Locked on Grizzlies. So make sure that you stay tuned for that as well. But we spent a lot of time talking about the Locked on NBA Top 100 list because it is here, voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked on Podcast Network. Our Top 100 was formed by experts that cover these teams and players every day. Find the full Locked On Sports today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Don't miss all the reactions of where the players landed. We talked about it a lot here on Locked On Grizzlies. We talked about the players that were just outside of the top 100. We talked about players that were inside of the top 100. And we talked about some players, Zach Edey, who I think will be on the top 100 next year when this list comes out again. But until then, appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked on Grizzlies each and every single day with us. Remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Damichael Cole. Until next time, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.